Hey everybody, it's been a while. First of all, sorry for the delay in the release of the podcasts. I know we normally release every 2 weeks. Coronavirus has made things more and more complicated for us out here. My editor actually got locked up in quarantine for 2 weeks, and there's no way for me to get access to him or to get the laptop that had the file to him in a quick and easy fashion. I actually had to mail the laptop to him in a box using snail mail to even get him this podcast to edit. Anyways, we've done it. He just got out of quarantine, by the way. He's fine. No coronavirus. I'm recording this. It's about 10:41 at night over here in Seoul. And we're just going to release the next podcast next week so we get all caught up. So thank you guys for being patient and understanding. But yeah, the world's kind of in a crazy spot right now. So the podcast will continue on. Also, quick announcement before we start the show. I am now streaming on Twitch. Right now, it's going to be every Monday afternoon and Thursday afternoon. I usually start at around 1 p.m. KST, sometimes a little bit earlier, sometimes a little bit later. But if you guys follow me on Twitter or Instagram, I'll be announcing when the stream starts then. But yeah, feel free to join and hang out. We've been doing a lot of StarCraft laddering and slowly getting my skills back since my hands have recovered from my repetitive stress injury. And then also, for future podcast episodes, we do still have some episodes that were recorded and saved at EVO Tokyo. But right now with coronavirus, it's kind of screwing up the whole business model for this podcast because the way I was envisioning this podcast working was every time people would travel to Korea for eSports related work, and there's tons of events out here all the time. Pretty much everybody in the industry ends up coming through Seoul at some point in time. I would grab them and do a quick interview, and in this way we'd have a really global representation. But as we all know, basically nobody's traveling anywhere right now. Again, unfortunately, we do still have some backup interviews, conversations that we recorded, but I'm going to have to start getting creative here for who I'm finding to bring on the show, or there might be some repeat guests, so I appreciate you guys understanding that as well. So this episode of the podcast was a very special interview because this guy rarely does interviews. It's Mr. Wizard. Some of you guys might not be familiar with that name, but he is the organizer for EVO. EVO, of course, being, I think, the most iconic fighting game tournament in the world. They represent all different types of fighting games. The turnout is huge. And anyways, I think this is an interesting interview because this is one of the last events that ever took place in eSports before coronavirus hit and shut everything down. So I look forward to the day we can all go to events again in the future. So I'm really grateful Mr. Wizard took the chance to sit down and talk to me. Yeah, that's it. So now on to the interview. So are you okay if we just start right now?
Yeah,
Jump
go
in?
for
All
it.
right, cool. So first of all, thank you for doing this. I know you're probably pretty busy running EVO. I thought to start the interview, I'd ask you, what games did you grow up playing?
I grew up playing mostly like midway games, so Killer Instinct, Primal Rage, like all the weird ones that people generally didn't play.
Yeah.
And then I kind of migrated over to the more popular ones like Street Fighter and Tekken as it went along. But I basically played anything that was competitive at the time.
And was that more in arcades or was that at home?
Definitely it was all arcades back in the
Yeah.
day. There really wasn't console or online play. This was 20 years ago, so it wasn't really out there.
And was for fighting games, were you always gravitated towards that, or were you doing like pinball games or some of these like beat 'em up games?
I played everything that was in the arcade.
Yeah,
I played Top Skater. I played driving games. I played just whatever was fun to me.
Yeah.
So, but I would play those games in a downtime when there maybe wasn't competition in the arcade, and then maybe later towards the nighttime when all the people kind of came into play, then I gravitate over to the fighting games and play those people.
Yeah. Did you have like any rivalries when you'd go to the arcade, or were you interested in trying to dominate other players, or was this more like escapism, just going somewhere to hang out? And the thing about arcades is that they're antisocial and social at the same time.
Right.
What attracted you to that?
I mostly went to arcades for competition. Like you just want to win and beat people up, but then
Yeah.
sometimes you'll mesh with a player and he becomes a good friend, and then you just hang out with him more. But I think mostly I was very competitive at a young age, so just wanted to win, and beat him up is a really easy gauge
Yeah.
to find out who's better real fast.
Did you end up doing like a lot of console games or any single player stuff? I've always been fascinated with multiplayer games and how people engage them, because there are people that only play multiplayer. They have no interest in story. And then there's people that are absolutely hardcore into, like JRPGs, take 80 hours to finish. What is your relationship with games like that?
Like back in the day, I would definitely play like role-playing games or Final Fantasy or something like that, where it's pretty easy to beat, or it takes you 3 to 4 days to beat it or whatever. I just, like, later on in life, it became the multiplayer kind of fun stuff where it's competitive. But I went through all the games of Nintendo and Sega and all that stuff back in the day as well. So I was just an all-around gamer back then.
So we're here at EVO. This tournament's massive. It's actually meant a lot to me as a fan watching. I've always been into one-on-one games growing up. I mean, team games are cool, but there's something about dominating in a one-on-one game that I've just found, I get such a high off of it. How did you end up here in this is such a unique environment, because it's not just that EVO is big for a game, it's the fighting game tournament.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about like how you started out going to arcades and competing against people, and now you're in charge of this major cultural influence globally?
Right. When I was growing up, we played at an arcade called Southern Hills Golfland, and at the time, it was probably the most competitive arcade that was around 20 years ago. So we're always throwing tournaments, we're always doing stuff to bring people in and kind of figure out who's the best. And the manager of Southern Hills at the time, he said, "You were great at bringing people in," and he obviously wants to make money. So he's like, you should work for Southern Hills and just do tournaments on the weekends. And I basically worked for the actual Golfland company on just the weekends. So I would do just tournaments, and then we kind of started doing like midweek tournaments just to kind of engage the players, get them to come in during the week. And then that kind of snowballed into my business partners, Tom and Tony Cannon, who were running like Battle by the Bay back in the day. And I hooked up with them, and then that kind of just snowballed from a 40-man arcade tournament into what it is today, which is an 18,000 person event in Las Vegas. So it was definitely a crazy road, but I mean, just everything led to everything else, and right place, right time.
So when you started, organizing these events, it's always interesting to see where things end up, right? Because I can't imagine you thought, well, one day we're going to be in Tokyo, and you have to have security at these events so people aren't just sneaking in. People are paying money to come down and watch the games.
Right.
When you were doing this, was this like a did you have an end game plan, or was this more of a step-by-step process?
In the beginning, it was a hobby, right? Like we all have jobs, and it's a cool little thing to do on the side, and you kind of don't know where it's going to go. But I mean, for 7-8 years, we're just doing the same games over and over. Like we don't know where this thing's going. It wasn't mainstream. Esports wasn't around. It was very underground, very just hidden. And no one wanted to like publicly say, "I'm going to a fighting game tournament." Like even the Cannon brothers, when they worked at Microsoft, they would always be like, "We're going to Las Vegas," but they wouldn't tell anyone going for like a video game event. But then it kind of just it went on, and then when Street Fighter 4 hit, it just became like crazy massive, and then we kind of just took it from there. But I mean, I don't know what the end game is. Like, is it selling off to another company? Is it running this as far as we can take it? Is it just keeping it as pure and underground as we can? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But we're in the renaissance of esports now, so we got to see where it goes.
Speaking about esports as a term, so I obviously have a StarCraft background. The word esports came from Korea. Mm-hmm. And I think in part the word was there because they wanted to get funding from the government. And if you put sports in something, that's smiled upon. Whereas if you put gaming, even today there's a little bit of a taboo with video games, which I still think is kind of stupid. But it's always there. Now, when fighting games picked up, a lot of them would say we're not esports, and they wanted to distance themselves from that. What was that like for you as a tournament organizer? I mean, do you have any thoughts on the term esports or what the FGC views as an esport and what they don't want it to be like or what they don't identify with it?
I think we were in the same boat. EVO was definitely anti-esports in the beginning because esports is a very kind of corporate, kind of just not what we were.
Yeah.
And so we pushed it off for a long time. And we just try to keep it grassroots and keep it community based and just do something fun for the community. And we weren't worried about the money portion or anything. It was just, let's do something fun for everyone involved. And then as you get along, like, you got to get sponsors on board.
Right.
And they're all about the esports bandwagon. And then it just kind of snowballs from there into something that is a bigger term. But I don't think in general we like the word, but it's there and we definitely have to embrace it now.
Right. One thing about EVO is that there are so many different publishers at one tournament. And that's actually unique for most events. What is it like working with that many different companies? They all have different attitudes, I imagine. And they probably have different goals for and visions for their game.
Yeah, it's challenging sometimes. Like it's very... it's very unique and not what we're used to because most of these esports events out there are just either the publisher or the developer running their own events, and they're just a one kind of game tournament. We're multi things, so every publisher thinks their game should have prime time showcase.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
It's basically juggling. Like you kind of figure out what you can do and past performance of their games being great. A lot of viewership, a lot of hype moments, stuff like that. And you kind of have to roll dice sometimes, but they all have egos. Yeah. They all want their game prime time, and you have to say no to these people sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a very hard situation. But I think EVO in general is a huge marketing tool for these guys. Like we're getting these dudes to tune in to people fighting, and we're not really getting involved with like their financial side. We're just like, here, we're just trying to do something cool, and sometimes they like that and sometimes they don't, so it's hard sometimes.
Without putting you on the spot too much, I mean, what are some of the biggest challenges about publishers in your experience?
It's kind of what I mentioned. Like they just all want their game top placement, top billing.
Yeah,
they want everyone with their eyes on their game, and they don't really care who is in the other slots, but they want the prime placement. And that's one of the biggest concerns because we've turned EVO Sunday into a spectacle.
Yeah,
where we're revealing new DLC and new games, and everyone's tuning in to watch. We have one stream. We don't go like the other days. We're going like 5-8 streams, but just Sunday is just one stream, one set of commentators, all eyes on this event. And sometimes the publishers don't like that their game is not on Sunday for us. So they fight back, and they're just like, "Well, we're not going to work with you anymore." And it's a really just a really bad situation for sometimes when you talk to these publishers if you don't like go with them or go down their path of where they want you to be.
Do they all have different views on esports in general, on competitive gaming? I mean, as an example, you look at a game like Smash, which, and this is true for a lot of esports titles, they were never built with esports in mind, right? I mean, StarCraft's a great example. Like when Blizzard went to Korea and saw how fast people were playing the game, they didn't anticipate that, right? I mean, StarCraft was actually almost like a city builder in some ways, in the minds of the people that were making the game. It was a game that you weren't supposed to be inputting hotkeys and stuff. And when you look at Smash, that was kind of a party game, right? I mean, they were just mixing all their franchises together. Do you ever find there's like conflicting views on what their game is? Do they view it as competitive? I guess I'm asking about Nintendo specifically here, but
yeah, like a lot of the publishers, some catch on faster than others. They're obviously willing to embrace what their game is and if it's competitive or not. In the terms of Smash, the producer has said many times it's not a fighting game. Yeah, but yet the competitive scene is there, and now they're willing to travel in droves to EVO and show up for the thing. So he like Smash in general, it very well may be a party game, but you can also play it on a competitive level,
Yeah.
and we've seen that.
Yeah.
And if you take out all the non-competitive elements like items and the like 3 or 4 players on the screen at one time, you can make it competitive.
Yeah.
And that's what the Smash community has done. They built a really good kind of just showcase of our game can be a fighting game, and we play it like that, and you're not going to tell us otherwise.
When you're doing events like this, I think the thing that makes EVO the most unique is how many different games there are here. Do you guys ever think about expanding to other like non-fighting games or other one-on-one games or maybe even team games?
We've done it in the past. We've had Mario Kart at EVO. We've had
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, we've had some weird games over the years. We've kind of tried it. As long as there's a competitive scene and it's like a one-on-one kind of format, we can roll some dice sometimes and have some very unique picks. So we've tried stuff in the past, but we kind of like our like we just stay in our lane. Like we know fighting games, we know what we do. We're really good at it. We hold the world championships every year. We're not going to try to expand out because there's other leagues that do that kind of stuff. So if you wanted to do like shooting, like Call of Duty, or if you wanted to do StarCraft, or you wanted to do anything, there's leagues and other tournaments for that stuff. We just try to stay in our lane.
What, when you look at stressful jobs, event organizer is actually among the highest. I mean, there's like people that drive ambulances and police officers and work in the military, but actually event organizer is among the most stressful job that there is. It oftentimes hits the top 10 list. Now you've been doing this for a long time. Is it still stressful for you, and was it stressful to begin with?
I almost quit EVO 3 times.
Really?
Like, straight up, like I'm leaving, and just because it's drama behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I don't think it's as stressful as it once was when you have everything on your back and you're still trying to grow your company. And but when you start bringing in money and you can afford to pay people and get some people on your team, they can take a lot of the weight off your back.
Yeah.
So now it's all just delegating stuff. Like, hey, you're handling your side. Everyone, it's all farmed out. And then I just basically am chief fire putter outer.
Yeah.
Like if something goes wrong, I'm the guy that you go to the top for the answers, and then once you put out, it's pretty stress free. But the planning stage is obviously a little bit stressed because you have to plan for, and we're the only tournament out there that is still open. Like if we got a crazy game like Street Fighter 6 and like 50,000 people show up, we would try to accommodate it.
Yeah.
Like, and a lot of people, they'll close it off, or too many people, it's dangerous for their event, but we've always kept it open. And in 2016, Street Fighter 5 had over 5,000 people. And we've never ran a tournament over 2,000 people at the time. So it's just a logistical nightmare at that point. Like, hey, we got to get 5,000 people through down to top 8 in 2 days.
Yeah.
And how do we do that? And that kind of stuff is very stressful. But we're veterans. We've been doing this for 20 years. So it's not like we haven't seen that kind of stuff before. And we have a really great team. So we just work through it. But there are some nights that you want to pull your hair out and you can't sleep, and it's really nerve-wracking, but those nights are far and in between now.
A lot of people don't know about this, but like I've worked at a lot of events, and there's always some issue with what if this thing catches on fire. Like when I was doing some work with ESL in Burbank, apparently all the furniture that was used on the set, they had to buy a second like a second couch, an identical version of that, and light it on fire to see how fast it would burn. They have to spend double on the budget for furniture just to see, okay, is this super flammable or not? And they have to burn it in front of a fireman, and then there's always a fireman in the building.
Yeah. So on EVO Sunday in the actual Mandalay Bay Arena, we have to pay for a fire marshal to stand by the fire controls.
Yeah.
And we turn off the sprinkler system, and his job is to stand there and monitor all of that. He doesn't do anything. His job is to monitor because the system is off, because you have 12,000 people in an arena. So his job is to just sit there and make the call if we need to get everyone out of here, but that's his job. And it's just like weird kind of stuff like that. It always drives me crazy.
Speaking of doing events, and all the weird stuff you have to go through, how complicated is it to try to book a venue overseas?
Oh, so in 2010, we had announced EVO Japan for the first time. And we had a venue all set up, and we were going to do it 2 months after the Vegas event. And then the big earthquake hit. And then the nuclear power plant was offline, leaking stuff, and we had to cancel the event. I still want to do a Japan event, but you can't convince people to go where nuclear stuff is spilled over.
Right.
So that got canceled for like 6 years, and then like EVO got big when Street Fighter V hit. So like, let's try it again. Let's try to get a venue. But the culture in Japan is to not deal with non-Japanese people.
It's very insular.
It's very annoying. What it is. So like, you have to have boots on the ground in Japan, like going to these hotels and venues and trying to secure something for our company. And at the time, like, we had never tried anything overseas, so it was a logistical nightmare, to be honest. And we partnered with 4Gamer and their parent company, and we kind of just worked together to get a venue. But it's nothing like the U.S. The U.S. is very open and welcoming, and they want your business because they're going to bring in a certain amount of people. But in Japan, it's 100% 180 the other way.
I always feel like in Japan, there's always a way to do something, and it feels like it's a secret.
Yeah.
What is it like getting ready for an event? Let's actually go with your very first overseas event. That was in Japan? Is that correct?
Yes, it was in 2018.
So what was the build-up like to that? Because that has to feel unreal.
Yeah, the expectation is super high. Like, you're trying to duplicate a very successful U.S. event in another country.
Yeah,
and it's very overwhelming. You have to do it perfect the first time. Otherwise, you're not getting these people to come back. And they're expecting what they saw in Vegas to be replicated overseas, and it's not going to be like that.
No,
I thought the 2018 event was more like EVO 2010. Like, it was a little bit behind. It was smaller, but it was more intimate. And we're still running tournaments, and it was cool. We had the BYOC and everything, but it's still 10 years behind on what we've kind of accomplished in the U.S.
Yeah.
So it's very daunting, and you don't know what's going to happen the first year. And we made a bunch of mistakes. Like, we just, stuff that we had already passed in the U.S. event kind of came back and did some damage in the Japanese event. So it's just a weird culture, and you kind of have to fix all the problems from a different area. But the expectation couldn't have been higher for that event because we're trying to duplicate it, and we couldn't. So you kind of have to just fix it and move on and go over the next year.
I mean, Japan's the mecca of fighting games, right? I mean, this is truly, fighting games came from here.
Right.
Do you have ambitions to move EVO to other locations around the world, or is this going to stay more of a U.S. Japan thing?
Japan's EVO is more just a test market to see how it works in another country, because there's so many logistical problems and stuff like that. We're definitely have stuff on the radar for other countries, maybe Europe, maybe Korea, maybe Amsterdam, maybe Australia, maybe Macau. Who knows? It's very open, but they have to have a scene, and you got to have people willing to come out to our event if we hold an event there. But I think Japan is a very test market kind of event. Like, hey, if we can duplicate this overseas, where else can we duplicate it?
Do you ever have cities that bid for you? Do you ever end up in situations where, and a lot of times this is where it can get really interesting as far as event organizing, because places like New York, they don't need to bid, to get you there, because everything's happening in New York. But there's a lot of moments where cities want to be more on the map. I mean, for the people listening to this is one of the reasons why occasionally there's a tournament going on somewhere, and you go, why the fuck is there a tournament going on there, right?
Right.
And a lot of times it's because the city will pay you or set up some kind of deal for you. Do you get a lot of that?
Yes, it's happened a lot.
Yeah.
Most recently, the Dallas Cowboys stadium was like, hey, we want to steal you away. But they have to understand that we get such a good deal in Vegas. For that to happen, your deal has to be incredible.
Is Vegas they have the best deals that in the U.S., right? Vegas is kind of built to just have people come in and come out.
Right. And I think as long as your guys are in their hotel spending money, they love you. And if they can do that, and with EVO, it's really cool because it's all inclusive.
Yeah.
You have the Friday and Saturday portion in the ballroom at Mandalay Bay. And the arena is actually in Mandalay Bay on Sunday. So they don't ever have to leave the hotel if they don't want to.
Yeah.
And hotels love that. Like, hey, I get 5 days of this dude spending money at restaurants and bars and gambling and drinking and shows. And, like, when you do that kind of stuff, they will love you to death.
Yeah.
So I think Vegas is the perfect town, though. Like, you could bring your family, and they could go do other stuff, and you're playing video games. And maybe they come watch you. Maybe they come support you. But they can go around town and just do anything they want. and everyone has a family vacation together, and it works out really well. So, I mean, places like New York have obviously come to us and said, hey, what would it take to bring you to, New Jersey has their big facility, the basketball arena over there, Barclays Center, which also put in a bid for EVO at one point. They're like, hey, you should bring our event here, blah, blah, blah. But they don't seem to take us seriously when they make the offer. They're like, yeah, you just bring your event here and we'll charge you full price and you'll do whatever. And I was like, I'm not feeling the vibe over there. So
you mentioned Macau a little bit earlier. I know Macau is I think some people might not know this, but it's actually larger gambling center even than Las Vegas.
You're right.
Mostly Chinese gamblers there. But I, out of curiosity, I don't know how much you've talked to places in Macau, but how do they compare to Las Vegas as far as venue bidding?
I mean, they're definitely building it to compete. And they definitely have a lot of like unique buildings and stuff over there to kind of house an event like EVO.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we haven't really talked very seriously about it, but that's definitely on my radar of like, hey, this is like the Asian version of Vegas. So let's try to...
Have you been there before?
I have never been there before.
It's really interesting because my first time going to Vegas was incredible. Like, I was blown away. Vegas is very impressive, and Macau, like, it feels like they haven't quite caught up to the I guess the glamour, the glitz that Vegas has.
Right.
Like, Vegas kind of knows what it's doing, and Macau is I don't know, it's a very different feel, but it's got to be competitive, right?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, obviously they're probably trying to get all the Chinese people to come over there,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah.
that's their whole goal.
Because for people listening, it's illegal to gamble in China,
Right,
but you can hop right over to Macau.
right.
I don't know if you knew about this. This is so weird. It's illegal for Koreans to gamble in Korea, but not for foreigners. So I can gamble.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know how Koreans aren't rioting in the streets over this. Like, this would never fly in America. And
Right.
America would be like, what do you mean other people can gamble here and we can't?
Yeah, that seems a little bit... I mean, U.S. has weird laws like that. It's like some states you can gamble online in and sometimes you
Or you
can't.
could be like on a boat in the river. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just weird stuff like that. But, I mean, I think Macau could compete, but... I mean, if they're just going after... I don't think they're going after the tourist kind of event stuff. They're going after actual gamblers.
Yeah, that's true.
So once they figure out, like, hey, we need to expand like Vegas did, because Vegas in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s was all about gambling. Like, how much you're spending, how much you're doing, that's the return they get. But then they kind of converted it over to, like, it's a convention town, it's a show town. They get more people coming in just for that kind of stuff over gambling now.
Yeah.
So they kind of just turned a corner within Vegas. So it'd be interesting to see if Macau actually turns a corner and says, we want to get the tourist faction in here.
Yeah.
And go from there. But I think right now they're just pure going after gamblers.
In the U.S., is there a number 2 city? Is there, like, I don't know, New Orleans or some place that comes close to good offers for venues?
Ironically, it's Los Angeles, because Los Angeles can house.
Really?
Because their convention center is super big.
Yeah.
And they also do Comic-Con like in San Diego, so they have space there too.
Yeah.
And LA has the hotels and the kind of infrastructure to do it, like an event like that. So EVO's became just so big that we can't be housed in a lot of smaller venues now.
Yeah.
So our pickings are pretty slim if we ever wanted to move it, or if we wanted to go to a different hotel. Like this year, we've upped the floor space to now 500,000 square feet, which is unprecedented for an FGC event, let alone an actual convention in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's going to be very hard to move it out of Las Vegas at this point, because we think we found a good home, and I think it's a perfect fit for our attendees. So it would take an incredible offer from like LA or from New York or New Orleans or Seattle or any one of these places that have convention spaces to kind of get us to move. So I think we're good for the next 5 years, but I mean, time will tell.
Is it a balancing act trying to figure out like how often to do EVO? I mean, there's some events, we do this with StarCraft, right? How many seasons of GSL do we want to have a year?
Right.
Because how meaningful does it become, right? There has to be a certain amount. Do you have that issue with EVO and trying to figure out how often to put it on and
So in 2006, 2007, we had Toyota as a title sponsor, and their whole thing was we want to do EVO North, South, East, and West.
Yeah.
And so we kind of executed that. And what we kind of found from that was the people that go to EVO East were like, hey, I've seen an EVO event. I don't need to go to Vegas. And then we kind of realized, oh, we're not doing the same level of event as we are in Las Vegas.
The more you put out,
right. And so, and then there was other FGC events that do kind of a season year round. You got final round, you got Combo Breaker, you got CEO, you got SCR, you got just events that cover the calendar. And so we just kind of decided, let's just be the Super Bowl. Like, let's just be the one event a year that we find out who the actual de facto champion of the world is, and kind of do it that way. And that way we can just throw all of our eggs into one basket and make a really cool event.
Yeah.
And not have to worry about saturation, because saturation in the FTC is crazy.
Yeah.
Like, at one point 2 years ago, there was a Smash tournament every single day of the year. Like,
what?
That's crazy. Yeah, like
I didn't know
if you
that.
wanted to play Melee at any point, you could go to a tournament throughout the week and play every single day. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And saturation is a huge thing in the FGC.
They had this problem with when StarCraft 2 came out, because that was the second esports boom, basically. Right. And it was like, I remember I was doing our finals in Korea, and there was also a tournament going on, I think in LA, and then another major tournament going on in Sweden. And it's like, who the fuck's the best then?
Exactly.
The technical term is market confusion, but it's like, well, nothing means anything because all the players aren't here.
Right.
And so it's like, well, this is the best person in the convention hall.
Right. Exactly. That's why EVO's become so big that no one wants to be around our weekend, because
there's a tournament going on right now, right? Is Genesis?
Yeah, Genesis 7 is in California, and we announced first, but we didn't announce Smash at the time because it takes a while to get a license from Nintendo to kind of announce it. And they announced Smash, and they had great registration numbers. And then we announced Smash, and then the Japanese community, who doesn't really travel for anything, was like, "Hey, let's just go to EVO." And but we thought different continents, different time frame. Like they're on like right now, and we're just finishing our airs, so it doesn't really conflict in terms of viewership and different time frames. But on the same weekend does suck, because you want to get all the content and all the players to your event to make it the best it can be. And I think that's why EVO World in Vegas does that a really good job, is we put our event out, the date out like 9-10 months early. It's like, hey, we're staking this weekend. If you want to compete with us, you'll not do well, but we just want to make sure that we get everyone who is competitive into one place and find out who the world champion is.
I imagine one of the difficulties about running something this big is, first of all, like, out of all the things in the world, in my experience, that people are passionate about, I think the most is video games, right? And you're running this big event with all these different games, and this means so much to people. But there are people that are haters. People get mad at you. I've experienced this as a caster. Like, there's been periods where StarCraft 2 is like, maybe like in Heart of the Storm, it was just not a good version of the game, and my casting wasn't as good. And I was getting hated on, and it's kind of weird, because it's like, well, I'm also having the same problems you guys are having in the game, but you know. Is it stressful being a public figure and being I guess an elder and a leader in something that it's a lifestyle? It's so important to people. It's people's passions.
Yeah, obviously the term, if you don't have haters, you're not doing something right, means a whole lot, because these people are so passionate and they love EVO, but they don't love some of the decisions that we have to make. And we have to make hard decisions sometimes. What games make our main roster? What kind of inclusion do we have for everyone who comes to the event and then gets knocked out early? We got stuff to do. And like, I can't have fun online anymore. Like with Twitter, if I say one little mean thing, they'll turn it into a meme and they'll blow me up. And it's the way it goes now. I feel like kind of like a blue poster in Blizzard, where anything I say will be picked up for a news outlet now. Like, it's gotten to that point where I can't even, I have to be, and we had to, who would have thought a fighting game tournament would have to have PR? In my wildest dreams, that would have never happened. But we have to have PR now, because if we say the wrong thing or we do the wrong thing, we get fried publicly. So it's definitely very stressful in terms of just like having to do the right thing. And we love that our fans are super passionate. Yeah. And if you don't hear feedback, you're not doing something right. So if we're doing something wrong, we're going to hear about it, and maybe we will change the decision or make it better next year. But we definitely love the feedback of fans being so passionate to where it can rock their world. So we definitely have to like pay attention to those kind of people.
Do you ever have you ever heard the term like imposter syndrome? Do you ever feel like it's weird that you're in this position and like you have all this responsibility and this started as a passion and now it is there's an infrastructure and this is a thing that happens. I mean, as a fan of EVO and fighting games, it was like, oh, EVO's on, or that guy won EVO. Was it an American? Was it a Japanese player? Is that weird for you at all?
It's very weird, and I don't like that EVO has a lot of power, but we can determine like a fate of a fighting game. Like if a fighting game is not doing well and then it's not at EVO, that game will die. But if that game somehow it's doing okay, and then EVO, this is what happened in Eunice last year, Under Night and Birth. That game was very, very underground, very, very passionate, but it was very few people were playing the game. And it was really cool. And then we kind of bumped it up by having it in EVO. And that community just took off. Like, it was like, oh, we've seen the light. And then all these people who are pro players were like, hey, let's try out this game.
Yeah.
And it's very scary having that kind of power. And I wish we didn't have that power.
Yeah.
But when you build a brand like we have built it, where it's got global influence, like, it's crazy how much like influence we have. Like what we say, if we go publicly and say, hey, Street Fighter sucks, then it carries some clout now. So you have to be really careful about that kind of stuff. And I think that I would not like to have that kind of power. And we try not to get involved with the power struggles of what games are top and what games are not and all that stuff. But we're definitely very aware of having the power to where we can influence purchasing. We can influence like spectating. We can influence if these people want to play this game continuously after the launch. It's very crazy that we are where we are now.
Do you actually let me ask this question, and I know this wasn't your idea, but like what does it do with there's a controller for a prize for the Smash?
I can't get into that.
You can't get into that?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I haven't asked anybody this yet, and it's
I'll say Japanese law does not prevent any kind of prizes over a certain amount of the entry fee. It's a very hard thing when you're dealing with a tournament in Japan because the laws are so archaic here.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why esports is big in Korea,
right? And not in Japan,
and not the government will even fund esports events in Korea. They're big on the cultural exports of that nature, where and obviously it's not for you, but for people listening, like if you go into an arcade in Japan, pachinko machines are there.
I was just about to talk about that.
Yeah,
that's how
you can gamble in an arcade.
Yeah, well, that's how they skirt the laws in Japan.
Yeah.
So in pachinko, you place the metal balls into the thing and you win metal balls back, and then you go to the store next door and you trade the metal balls for like a coupon or a voucher, and then you take that voucher to the next store to get a prize.
Yeah.
And that's how they skirt the laws. And when you're like, we thought about like, hey, we have a third party company maybe offer a flight to EVO or just some kind of prizing. It gets a little complicated with the government because they're like, who owns this company that's paying out? Who's doing this? And so the way we get around that is we make a free tournament in Japan. That way, none of those laws apply.
Yeah.
And that's why the EVO Japan is a free tournament, because then we can pay out $1 million
it's
yen.
open.
And it's an open tournament.
You just sign up and you can play. Yeah. Which also means you end up with people that don't show up.
Yeah,
they're not obligated financially or anything.
Correct, and that's just the way it goes in Japan.
Yeah.
So you either go the route. The rule is you can only pay out 20 times what the entry fee is maximum.
Yeah.
So if you collect $10, you can only pay out a maximum of like $2,000.
What's weird about this, and I don't know if we're going to get to the answer to this,
right?
But what's weird about it is that it is illegal to gamble in Japan, but gambling is everywhere.
Yeah.
And I'm not a Japanese legal scholar, but from what I understand, gaming is viewed, making money off of a game is viewed as gambling, even though we both know that any esport is actually a mind game. It's a competition. It's a game of ability and skill. Is there not one walk around, like some loophole here to make that easier in Japan?
I mean, we've done massive research on this, and
pachinko balls.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. Yeah.
Like we've actually done research and trying to figure out the best scenario for a fighting game tournament in Japan, and it's really hard. And so we're just hoping that, I mean, the current government is now handing out eSports licenses to winners of tournaments, and then they can receive more payout than a normal payout is. And so we're hoping the government is just, okay, we're going to get on board with this esports train and change the laws.
Yeah.
But until they do that, we're stuck with the current system, which is currently broken.
Yeah.
And there's no real good workaround. And I think what you've seen us do at EVO Japan is kind of the best scenario for that.
Yeah, yeah.
But until they change the laws, we're
This
kind
is,
of
as far as I can tell, the most difficult market.
Yeah.
Actually, to work in. Like, I think if people, because most of the people listening to this are in the United States or Europe, but like, esports is big everywhere except for Japan, which is weird. Like, I've been in Korea for 12 years. And one of the reasons I didn't go to Japan initially for travel is I just assumed that there was going to be esports stuff here, so I'm going to end up here anyways. And I might as well just wait for someone to pay for my ticket to go there, and then I'll just do that. So I was going to places like Cambodia and Mongolia, and just places where there's not going to be an esports event.
Right.
But like in Southeast Asia, it's blowing up in Vietnam, in Indonesia. But like Japan, it's not catching on. I think maybe I'm wrong, but is part of this a cultural thing with Japan? They definitely have like a way of doing stuff, and I don't know.
Japan is very old school. Like they're just an old school mentality, and what they've done in the past works for them.
Yeah.
And they don't like to change stuff.
Yeah.
This is kind of reminds me of like when the early end of the century, like 1990, early 2000s, they were ahead in the technology war. Like cell phones were like crazy out of control in Japan.
Yeah.
And
everything was very futuristic.
Yeah, and they were just ahead of the game, and then all of a sudden that turned around, and now like their cell phone technology is crazy behind, and
people still use fax machines.
Yeah, it's a very old school mentality, and they don't like change at all.
Yeah,
and they don't adapt to this current surroundings, and then they're just going to get left behind.
Yeah.
So unless some people get involved with the government or esports in general over here and kind of show them like, hey, you need to change your ways, otherwise esports is not going to be a thing in Japan.
Yeah.
Then it might just die here. And people were like, it's too difficult to work in Japan. Let's just go elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that the fact that we do have an EVO Japan event is pretty crazy, because the amount of loopholes and stuff we have to jump through just to get stuff done is crazy enough. So maybe it becomes too difficult and we have to move the event elsewhere, but who knows? But if they don't start changing their tune and kind of working with the video game people or the community members, then esports is never going to be a real thing in Japan.
Thank you for doing this interview, by the way.
No problem.
I really appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy. We have a short after show. It's just like us continuing to talk, but it's maybe 10 more minutes.
Sure.
That's okay?
That's fine.
All right, cool. Thank you again, man.
Yeah, no problem.
All right,
it was a very, very good show.
Thank you, dude. Guys, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. That was actually one of my favorite interviews I've done for the podcast. Again, I will be streaming on Monday and Thursday. I know some of you have also been asking when will people be able to come down to the studio. We'll be announcing when that is. Obviously, we don't know yet, but if you want to come see the show live, eventually when things get better, please feel free to come down to see GSL in person. We'll be announcing that when it's safe. And yeah, that's it, guys. So I'll see you guys on my Twitch stream. Again, next episode will come out next week. I love you guys. Stay safe. Keep washing your hands and social distancing. And I'll see you again soon. This podcast was produced by State. Artwork by Alaris. Music by Mark Lentz. Special thanks to our top supporters, Seth N., Rohit Sambadi, and Charlie Sheaver. I love you guys. We'll be back again soon. Bye-bye.